Hello, BookTube. I recently watched a video on Britta Bowler's channel, to which I assume you're all subscribed. I shall leave a link down below in case you're not, in which she gives the results of a recent reading spate she did of very short books. And I loved it, as I love all of Britta's videos. I love the shout-out to the Murderbot Diaries. I love the opening book on her list, Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arman, which is a terrific, terrific little book. I had no idea that Vintage made the beautiful paperback that she held up, and now I have to have it. I don't know where I'll find it, but I have to have it. I always say the Brattle will provide, referring to the bookshop here in Boston, but they're not so good with specific editions. I may have to go on Book Depository and just get that thing. But as much as I loved Britta's video, it lacked one crucial element, which was the Steve touch. And so I am once again swooping down out of nowhere to weaponize Britta's short and sweet video into the short and sweet book tag. I know, none of you are safe when I decide to weaponize a completely innocent video. And so we're going to make a short and sweet book tag. And the parameters are very simple. Hold up a few. 1, 2 would be a little bit on the wimpy side. 10 would probably be too many. Hold up a few very short books that you can recommend. One of the points that Britta makes in her video is that she doesn't just want to tell you the results of reading these short novels, one a day, but wants to recommend them and tailor her recommendations. So you should be able to do that too. Don't just pick short books that happen to be on your shelves. Talk to us. Tell us about some of your favorite really short books, even if you don't have a copy. You know, just hold up a picture of it from your distant memory and tell us about it. And there are no rules for this tag in terms of how many books you can have. But there is a rule about length, because otherwise some of you are going to say, I don't consider a 400-page novel to be long. Okay? So the rule about length is the book can under no circumstances be 200 pages or more. If the book you pick is 200 pages or more, Britta will hate you forever. And just to kick things off on this weaponized tag, I have a pile of books of my own that I want to show you, starting with this, The Writing of Fiction by the great Edith Wharton. There's a blurry picture on the cover of her that's very intentionally so, because in her nonfiction she tends to be a little bit on the elusive side. And this book clocks in at 125 pages, I believe. 125 pages in this lovely old paperback, but even that is deceptive, because a large chunk at the back, the thing that brought this thing to my mind, is a long essay of hers about Proust that isn't connected with the rest of the book. The rest of the book has chapters on what is the nature of fiction, how to write a story, how to write a novel, things like that. And it is very interesting. I won't call the tone Mandarin, but the tone is definitely Olympian. This is one of the greatest novelists who's ever lived, and who doesn't really understand. You can tell that she's not at heart a teacher, because not only is she one of the greatest novelists who's ever lived, but she doesn't really understand why you're not. So she's trying her hardest to make the secrets of her art clear. But those parts, the didactic parts of the book, are not always the most effective. And there is an element of insider baseball here. You are going to feel very much like you were in the presence of someone who is not trying to teach a seminar, but who could. There's an infinite amount of riches to be drawn out of this book. You just have to work a little at it, that's all. So that's our first one. Next one will be about writing. This one clocks in at 149 pages with footnotes, and it was originally an article, as was The Art of Writing Fiction. This was originally an article, I think in The Atlantic, that got such a response that the author spun it out into a short book. This is B.R. Myers' book, A Readers Manifesto. The subtitle being An Attack on the Growing Pretentiousness in American Literary Prose. And B.R. Myers goes after a whole bunch of literary sacred cows on the American literary fiction landscape. He doesn't look at genre fiction, doesn't look at nonfiction. This is just the Cormac McCarthy's of the literary landscape. And rips them to shreds with such glee and so many jokes that land that I went through probably 2 years of people thinking that he was me, that we were the same person. Trust me, as I said at the time, 20 years ago when this came out, if I placed something in the Atlantic, I would not hide it under a bushel. I would sing from the rooftops. So no, B.R. Myers is not me. He's just another critic who's a little fed up with a lot of the pretentious flapdoodle that the Dude Bros love so much. So this is not a long book. I'm not vouching for the imprint status of any of these things, but if you can find this, and if you have occasionally picked up a sacred cow of modern contemporary literary fiction and thought, I don't know what I just read, but I know it wasn't good, and you maybe want somebody on your side aside from me, here you go. B.R. Myers is a perfect example. And then we'll do fiction. This thing won the Prix Goncourt. I have praised it many times on this channel. My copy is swollen with clips that I've tucked into it. This is Eric Vuillard's The Order of the Day. Thin little thing. Even though it's a work, it's a historical inquiry, I think is what the author would probably prefer to call it, rather than a work of history. It's 132 pages long. And it is largely about the bureaucratic mechanisms in the closed rooms at the conference tables that led to Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria. But more than that, it's a meditation on how that kind of thing how those kinds of backroom discussions by basically non-entities. You're supposed to look at this cover of this book, a well-chosen American cover. You're supposed to look at this and say, who the hell is that? And that is supposed to be the whole point, is that it's also a meditation on the mechanisms by which those closed-door meetings can cause great world events, including huge world tragedies. So the parts of this book set in 1938 Germany and Austria are amazing. It's just an amazingly well-done book. You might think, I'm not much for history. But you will be. In the hands of the right person, you will be. Same thing with this next one. There's a lot of history in this next book. This is, let's see, since I've started the tradition here, this clocks in at 157 pages. This is Venice Observed by the great Mary McCarthy, in which she was commissioned to write a book about Venice, knowing perfectly well that everybody and their brother had written a book about Venice, that literally every cliche, every walk, every painting, every building had been prosed to death, and that there was nothing more that could be done. And she proved that wrong, wrote an incredibly readable little book on Venice. Its history, the experiences of it, the place, the breadth of it. I have read lots of those books about Venice, lots and lots of them. If, like me, you have read a few of them and you think too often they come off like undigested guidebook pap, then find this book, because this does not. This is, and more, all the better if this is your introduction to this author, because she's well worth your acquaintance. So Venice Observed. And then we'll move on to another book. A lot of these things I've recommended on this channel. This is another book I've recommended many, many times. This is by William Service, and it is a book called Owl. It's a thin little thing. This is a sort of battered trade paperback. Yeah, it's well under 100 pages. And it has also, some of those pages are given over to original illustrations. This is the story of a man who takes in a tiny owl as the publicity. There's the owl on the bookshelf. As the publicity material on this said, the size of a beer can. Yes, the size of a beer can, the personality of a bank president. The little owl that this author takes in quickly loses any sense of disorientation and also any sense of fear, and starts to rule the house, as little owls taken into houses will do. I can also attest, pigs will do this as well. They lose their inhibitions pretty quick, and then they start to just order people around. That's also true of a certain breed of dog. I can't speak for all the others. Some of you have very nice, pliant dogs. Owl is amazing. There is a thriving little subculture of people who write books like this about owls. And this is the best of them by far, even though some of them have been very, very good. And in addition to being fascinating, because you are on the same learning journey as the author and finding out what this thing is, in addition to being fascinating, it's also incredibly moving. If you don't have a lump in your throat at the end of this book, then you ought to have either your throat or your lumps examined. And then we'll move on. Speaking of lumps in the throat, some of you will know exactly what this means. This is by Anna Quinlan, who has written a number of very short books that I could have put on this tag. But this one is going to be Good Dog, Stay. It's a thin thing. Let's see the page number. 82 pages with a photo at the end. Babies, boobies. This is so well under 100 pages, and this is one of the better evocations that I've seen in prose of that certain stage in a dog's life. You're never going to go poor selling a bestseller about getting a rambunctious puppy and bringing it into your house and having it eat the heirlooms and whatnot. You're never going to go poor doing that. It'll sell in the millions of copies. It'll be made into a movie. There'll be many sequels. There'll be toys. It's a lot harder sell to do a book about the end of a dog's life, which, because dogs age 7 times faster than humans do, we all live to see. It's not like having a pet tortoise or a pet cockatoo where they could easily outlive you. You're going to live to see the end of your dog's life as well as the beginning of it. And I understand why there are fewer effective books about it, because it kills you. It rips your guts out. You honestly don't think you're going to live through it. I have lived through it more times than I can count, except I know the number. And every single time, it is an annihilating experience. You don't believe that you're going to live through it. And the further on it goes, Anna Quindlen describes her rambunctious puppy, her absolutely rambunctious puppy who would leap everywhere and always wanted attention and food and scraps and bits of bacon. She describes the point in that puppy's life, which a lot of you are going to know very well, where she takes a bacon snack, throws it at the puppy on the floor, but the puppy is now 15 years old and the snack bounces right off their head. They don't even know it's there. And they're not interested in it anymore. They just want to sleep. Their senses are gone. They're still around, and if you rub their belly, they very much want to be here, but it's a very different experience. And it's usually shrouded in shadow by dog owners. Anna Quindlen here writes one of the rare examples of describing the wintry joys of that period. You wouldn't think there would be, but there are wintry joys to shepherding your best friend to the end of his life. There are joys to be found there, believe it or not, there are. And I've almost never seen them written about better than in this book. So if you have ever been thankfully, I'm probably 10 years away from going through this again. But if you've been in that period and have missed this book, it's a quick book. It's really, really good. Here's one that's even shorter. This is 52 pages long. This is from Biblioasis. Biblioasis does they follow their genius wherever it goes with publishing things, and they did a series of spooky little short stories that they published in book form. That was one of Britta's original rules for her short and sweet contestants. Was not in addition to being short, it also has to be standalone. Someone has to have published it in a book. And this is by E.F. Benson, the great E.F. Benson, and this is How Fear Departed the Long Gallery. In a tiny little paperback from Biblioasis. They did a whole bunch of these. And they sent me a batch of them. And this is about an old house with if you've ever been to a very old, like for instance, an English country house, a lot of them will have a long gallery, a longitudinal room with usually lots of paintings on the walls, sometimes French doors leading to the lawn on the other side. And the particular house in this story the long gallery is haunted. And the family all knows it. They don't think much of it. The only thing they say to guests is, by no accounts, be in the long gallery at night. We can even hold events. We can have little parties, soirees. We can have conversations in the long gallery during the day, but we clear out at night. It's very, very dangerous to be there. And there's the story tells us there's a long family history of why that is. We get some very standout stories from the family's history of things that have happened in the long gallery and why it has that evil reputation. And of course, you know what's going to happen in the course of this story. One of the contemporary characters in the setting of the story is, by no fault of their own, going to get trapped in the long gallery overnight. It's terrific. It'll take you, easily one sitting to read, and it's terrific. And so are all the other, these little stories for the Biblioasis. What do they call it? Well, no. I think it was a Christmas collection. It says a ghost story for Christmas. This isn't particularly a ghost story for Christmas. But I think that's what it is. Revive a spooky old Christmas tradition. So maybe that's what this is. I'm sure you could find this. And they're all, I don't know how many Biblioasis made. They sent me 4 of them, and they were all well chosen. And that's mighty short. Then we'll go to kids' books, because this is just tremendous. It's a classic, and it is very short. It is, what have we got here? 98 pages long. This is by Deborah and James Howe, and it is the Immortal Bunicula. And it's about a family that adopts a bunny. But is the bunny a bunny, or is the bunny a vampire? Or both? Because I think the origin of this whole thing, Bunicula, has had a million different editions. It's tremendously enjoyable to read, or to read aloud to little ones, or even to older people. I think it probably had its ultimate origin in the fact that any of you who've been around rabbits, been around bunnies, or had one as a pet will know that often it doesn't take much in the way of angles of light to make their eyes shine bright red. It's just part of their ocular equipment. I think that's probably where this ultimately came from. But instead, the family has to wonder, do they have Bunicula in their midst? And I won't give it away, but in the end, the villain turns out to be just who you'd expect the villain to be. Then this next one is from Hesperus Press. And they took a small book by a great author and reprinted it in a standalone volume. This is 86 pages long. This is by L.P. Hartley, who a lot of you will know, and who I think wrote one of the greatest novel sequences of the 20th century. And this is Simone Perkins. As you can tell from the cover, this is a Venice book about a young woman who falls in love with riffraff in Venice. And this would also count, in addition to being sort of an unknown classic, a lot of presses like Hesperus Press, or that vintage volume of Elizabeth and Her German Garden that you saw in Britta's video. A lot of little presses like this will come out with neglected little masterpieces like this. I'm always happy when they do. Actually, this has a pub sheet in it. Did I get this from Hesperus Press? No, this is a pub sheet for Classics for the Masses, Shaping Soviet Musical Identity Under Lenin and Stalin. So I have no idea what that's doing here. Let's get that out of there. That doesn't belong in here. But in addition to being another Venice book, like the Mary McCarthy book, and in addition to being sort of the category of an unknown classic, a little thing that's an unknown classic, this is also very much a book for the gays. It was very much standard procedure. I won't quite look in Henry James's direction to write a Venice novel, an exotic Venice novel in which a young female character falls in love with a burly riffraff, when the young female character is very much a stand-in for the author. The author couldn't write his own story, so he wrote Simone Perkins' story instead, but full of fantastic characters, so I cannot recommend it strong enough. No idea if you can find it. Then this next one, also a novel, also very, very short, 123 pages. This is by Penelope Fitzgerald, and this is The Bookshop. A touching and rather dark little novel about a woman who decides to open a bookshop. And this is another perfect example. I've been appreciating Penelope Fitzgerald more with every reread. It's another perfect example of how she puts a lot of her, I would say all of her male contemporaries, a little bit on their wrong foot. Because she's writing a great, textured, full, memorable, satisfying novel in literally a fifth the space of the leather elbow-patched, quasi-academic, grand old man of letters that were writing at the same time that she was. This is a novella only in terms of technical classification. This is otherwise an incredibly rich and rewarding novel. And she got it this way by writing, at least in her mind, the kind of book. Imagine a book called The Bookshop, written by, I don't even know. Well, L.P. Hartley would be a good example. But also, when did this come out? 1978. So imagine The Bookshop, something like this, if it had come into the mind of, say, Norman Mailer to write. It would have been 500 pages long. And I believe that Penelope Fitzgerald probably came to this book by thinking of that 500-page book and then just whittling it down, mercilessly whittling it down. And the result is stunningly good. All of the books that I have reread by her in the last 20 years have been stunningly good, despite the fact that they're over in 30 minutes. And The Bookshop is so far probably my favorite example. Then as far as a classic goes, we were talking about an unknown classic, or a little-known classic. Now we'll deal with a great classic, a classic that is well-known, that everybody knows. 125 pages, that's with all of the bloviating introductions and forwards. So the book is 100 pages. And yet, it is every bit as viscerally powerful and eternally relevant as it was the day it was written. And that is the Metamorphoses. The Metamorphosis, the Metamorphoses. I almost went for Ovid, my favorite book, by Franz Kafka. This is the Susan Bernowski translation in this lovely W.W. Norton paperback, where the word has been transformed into a bug on the cover. It's just incredible. You can disregard David Cronenberg's introduction here, but the translation is fantastic. I'm always tempted when I see a new translation of Kafka to say, well, he's not all that difficult to translate. And then I remember he's acutely aware of every word he's using, and therefore he can be playing tricks on translators without even them knowing it. And this does a really good job of reflecting that. This is, if you've never read The Metamorphosis, about a man who wakes up to find he has transformed into a bug, and what effect that has on his world. If you've never read this, it is one of the most finishable, I was going to say accessible, but it's weird. Kafka was weird. Very profitably so, but weird. If you've never read The Metamorphosis, you could have a world classic, something that will be immortal for the length of the species, done today, if you have a copy. And this is the one that I recommend if you do, even though W.W. Norton had the horrible bad grace to run this thing without a blurb by yours truly. Richard Howard and Philip Lopate gave the blurbs on this thing, but that's okay. No, not holding any grudges. And then finally, we'll finish up this short and sweet book tag with a kid's book, which of course is going to be short. This is, I don't think the pages will be numbered. No, the pages aren't numbered, but probably 30 pages long. This is from, sorry, I should have been prepared. 1941, this is the Caldecott-winning novel by Clancy Halling, Paddle to the Sea, which is the story of a little toy that is dropped into the ocean. See, there's the boy with his toy. The paddle, that is Paddle to the Sea. And Paddle to the Sea is dropped into the ocean and floats along rivers, past locks and dams. There's a beaver. Look at that artwork. Just incredible. Paddle to the Sea ends up having massive adventures. Becomes a major storied voyager. Again, wonderful to read to little ones, but also wonderful to read yourself. Paddle to the Sea is probably still in print. It is something of a classic, as Caldecott winners tend to be. And it's short. So all of these things are short and sweet books. Books that are under 200 pages. In other words, things you could read in one afternoon that you will really like. So they are all recommendations. We have Paddle to the Sea. We have Kafka's Metamorphosis. We have The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. We have Simone Perkins by the great L.P. Hartley. We have The Immortal Bunicula. We have How Fear Left the Long Gallery by E.F. Benson in this great Biblioasis little paperback. We have Good Dog Stay by Anna Quinlan. You can say that when their faces are white and their eyes can't see anymore. You can say Good Dog Stay, but they don't. And that autumnal glory is captured perfectly in this book. Then we have Owl by William Service. What happens when you let a bossy little creature into your life? We have Venice Observed by the great Mary McCarthy in this little paperback, but it has many, many editions. We have Order of the Day by Eric Vuillard, about evil bureaucracy. In essence, about evil bureaucracy. We have a Readers Manifesto by B.R. Myers, in which he takes the steam out of a lot of contemporary literary reputations that really deserve it. And finally, The Writing of Fiction by Edith Wharton, in which, bless her, she basically looks at her readers and says, well, the first thing you want to do is write something immortally great. Yes, Edith, we're coming to you to get a few clues along those lines. So there you go. That is the short and sweet book tag, weaponized from Britta's video and now inflicted on all of you. So you go ye forth, pull the really thin books off your shelves, and tell us about them. And keep in mind the rules, okay? It would be, rule number one, it would be nice if the book was a recommend. You shouldn't really just pick a book because it's short if you haven't read it or if you didn't like it. And number two, for you pretentosauruses out there, 400 pages is not a short book. You don't get to move the goalpost. Anything longer than 200 pages, and Britta will hate you forever. So there you go, the short and sweet book tag. Can't wait to see what you show me. Thank you, BookTube.